What if a brilliant warlord dies before finishing his conquest? What if the greatest threat to an empire vanishes, and leaves the door open for his rival to return? In two very different corners of Asia, Vietnam and Japan, two extraordinary men rose from humble origins to dominate their worlds. One was Nguyen Hue, a military genius who emerged from a local uprising in 18th century Vietnam. He crushed invading Qing armies, overthrew rival dynasties, and seemed destined to unify the country under his rule. The other was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the son of a peasant in war-torn Japan. Through sheer brilliance, diplomacy, and force, he brought centuries of civil war to an end and stood atop a unified Japan. Both men rewrote the rules of power in their countries. Both became unstoppable, until they died. And with their deaths, everything unraveled. In Vietnam, Nguyen Hue died at age 40. His unfinished rule left a vacuum. Into that void returned Nguyen Anh, a royal rival once forced into hiding. He rose again and founded the Nguyen dynasty, the last monarchy in Vietnam's history. In Japan, Hideyoshi passed away at 61, leaving behind a young heir and a fragile political arrangement. Within a few years, his former subordinate Tokugawa Ieyasu seized power and created a shogunate that would rule Japan for over 2 centuries. This is a story of two leaders, one from the rice fields of central Vietnam, the other from the muddy roads of Sengoku Japan. Neither was born into power. Neither inherited a throne. But both conquered nations with their minds, their armies, and their will. And yet, both died before they could secure what they built. What happens when a revolutionary leader disappears too soon? What does history do with unfinished empires? Let's look back at the lives of Nguyen Hue and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and ask: did their deaths change the course of history, more than their victories? We often imagine rulers as men born into royal bloodlines, raised in palaces, trained in power, destined for the throne. But Nguyen Hue and Hideyoshi weren't born to rule. They climbed from the bottom, in societies that told them it was impossible. Nguyen Hue was born in 1753, in a farming and trading village in central Vietnam. His family were not nobles. They were small traders, part local merchants, part village officials. He was taught literature and martial arts by a political exile from the north, and legend says he learned 10 things for every one taught. Whether myth or truth, his rise was undeniable. In his 20s, he and his brothers launched a rebellion that would become a revolution. Over the next 15 years, Nguyen Hue defeated the southern Nguyen lords, crushed the northern Trnh family, routed Siamese forces, modern Thailand, and most famously, annihilated a 290,000 strong Qing army that invaded northern Vietnam in 1789. No general in Vietnamese history had ever done so much in so little time. Meanwhile, across the sea in Japan, another man was making his way up from even lower beginnings. From the servants' quarters to the summit of Japan. On the other side of the sea, in 16th century Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was born in 1537 to a poor foot soldier. He had no noble family name, no land, no samurai lineage, and in feudal Japan, that usually meant no future. As a child, Hideyoshi worked menial jobs. He began as a servant in the house of the powerful warlord Oda Nobunaga, then became a weapons carrier, and eventually earned Nobunaga's trust. But Hideyoshi had something far rarer than lineage: political instinct, social intelligence, and military brilliance. When Nobunaga was assassinated in 1582, Hideyoshi wasted no time. He rushed to defeat the traitor Akaki Mitsuhide in the Battle of Yamazaki, and quickly positioned himself as Nobunaga's de facto successor. Not everyone accepted his authority. But one by one, Hideyoshi defeated or persuaded the remaining warlords. In 1583, he triumphed at the Battle of Shizugatake. In 1584, he faced off with Tokugawa Ieyasu in an inconclusive but stabilizing campaign. He launched the Shikoku invasion in 1585. In 1587, he led a massive campaign to subdue Kyushu. Finally, in 1590, Hideyoshi besieged Odawara Castle and crushed the Hj clan, the last major holdout. Japan was unified, for the first time in over 100 years of civil war. And the man who did it was not a shogun, but a former peasant who once worked in a garden. 2 men. 2 cultures. 1 pattern. Nguyen Hue in Vietnam and Toyotomi Hideyoshi in Japan both rose from obscurity. Neither inherited their power, they earned it. And both seemed unstoppable. But now a question emerges. If they conquered their worlds, why couldn't they hold on to them? History sometimes gives us rare moments when one man becomes bigger than the systems around him, when even kings and nobles bend to his will. In Vietnam, the late 18th century belonged to Nguyen Hue. After defeating the powerful Nguyen lords and capturing the southern city of Gia Nh in 1777, he clashed repeatedly with Nguyen Anh, the last royal claimant of the Nguyen family. Nguyen Anh fled, hid, regrouped. Between 1778 and 1785, the Tay Sen dynasty, led by Nguyen Hue and his brothers, controlled much of southern Vietnam. Nguyen Anh, desperate, invited help from the Siamese army, modern-day Thailand. In 1785, Nguyen Hue struck back. In a brilliant ambush along the Rchgm and Zoe Mut rivers, he decimated nearly the entire Siamese force in a single day. Nguyen Anh barely escaped, abandoning even his family as he fled to Cambodia. But Nguyen Hue's greatest triumph came in 1789. After the deposed Le King invited the Qing dynasty of China to intervene, nearly 290,000 Qing troops invaded northern Vietnam, establishing camps in Thang Long, modern Hanoi. Nguyen Hue, now crowned Emperor Quang Trung, led one of the most astonishing military campaigns in Vietnamese history. In just 6 days, he marched north from Hue, launched a series of night attacks, and utterly routed the Qing army. The invaders were driven out. Their generals were killed or humiliated. Nguyen Hue had saved the nation, again. But he was more than a battlefield commander. He had the mind of a reformer and diplomat. He promoted education in the Vietnamese script, Ch Nam. Planned to move the capital to Ngien, a central location bridging north and south. Managed relations with China with a mix of charm and strength. By the early 1790s, he ruled Vietnam's core. His rival Nguyen Anh was still alive, but barely a threat. And yet, he wouldn't live to finish the fight. Hideyoshi never took the title of shogun, he wasn't from a noble clan and had no samurai blood. Instead, he ruled Japan as Kenpaku, or imperial regent, and later as Grand Chancellor. Power flowed through the emperor, but real authority rested in his hands. And he didn't stop at conquest. Hideyoshi began remaking Japan from the inside. He ordered the disarmament of peasants, known as the sword hunt, to prevent future uprisings. He froze the social order. Samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants could no longer move between classes. He built Osaka Castle, a fortress so grand it became the symbol of his regime. And near the end of his life, he launched a vast invasion of Korea in 1592, hoping to push into China, an ambition that overstretched his empire. At home, his enemies, especially Tokugawa Ieyasu, bowed and smiled. Thank you for using Panopreter Basic. But they waited. Because Hideyoshi made one fatal mistake. He had no secure successor. When he died in 1598, his only son, Hideyoshi, was just 5 years old. To preserve the regime, Hideyoshi set up a council of 5 elders, powerful daimyo who would rule collectively until the boy came of age. One of them was Tokugawa Ieyasu. He played his role, for a while. Then, slowly and methodically, Ieyasu undermined the council, won alliances, and consolidated power. In 1600, he crushed his last rivals at the Battle of Sekigahara. 3 years later, he was named shogun, founding the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for the next 264 years. Hideyoshi's son, Hideyori, was sidelined. 15 years later, in 1615, Tokugawa forces laid siege to Osaka Castle. Hideyori and his mother committed suicide in its flames. The man who had once bowed to Hideyoshi had now erased his entire legacy. At the height of his power, Nguyen Hue was preparing to finish off his final rival, Nguyen Anh, once and for all. But in 1792, at just 40 years old, he fell gravely ill and died, suddenly, unexpectedly. No one knows exactly what killed him. But what's clear is what he left behind. A throne, and a child. His 10-year-old son, Nguyen Quang, was crowned emperor. But the boy was too young, inexperienced, and unrespected by the generals. The TSN leadership quickly fractured into rival factions. Meanwhile, the exiled Nguyen Anh, long thought defeated, began to return. Over the next decade, he rebuilt his army, gained support from foreign powers, and pushed north. In 1801, he captured Hue, the TSN capital. In 1802, he captured and executed Nguyen Quang. That same year, Nguyen Anh crowned himself Emperor Geelong, founding the Nguyen dynasty, which would rule Vietnam until 1945. The man once chased to the jungle returned to become king. Because his greatest enemy had died too soon. Nguyen Hue and Toyotomi Hideyoshi reshaped their nations through vision, will, and war. They built empires by defying the social order, only to see those empires fall to the very men they once defeated. They rose from nothing. They stood above all. But they left behind no one strong enough to protect what they built. And so history answered their brilliance with a cruel echo. It is not enough to win. You must outlive your enemies. History doesn't pause to honor greatness. When the strongest man falls, power doesn't wait. It simply moves to the next hand ready to take it. Nguyen Anh waited nearly 30 years for his moment. Tokugawa Ieyasu waited in the shadows for 2 decades. They weren't more brilliant than their rivals, but they were colder, more patient, and built quietly while others blazed too bright, too fast. Both Nguyen Hue and Toyotomi Hideyoshi shared a fatal flaw. They rose to the top, but never built a solid line of succession. Nguyen Quang was just a child, overrun by generals and court politics. Hideyori was even younger, surrounded by enemies, while Ieyasu had decades of experience and ambition. History is brutal that way. No heir, no future. If Nguyen Hue had lived just 5 more years, perhaps Vietnam's last dynasty would never have existed. If Hideyoshi had survived a decade longer, Tokugawa might never have ruled. But they didn't. They died at the worst possible time, when only they could hold their empires together. And that is the tragedy of men who can conquer everything. Except time.